Okay. So good evening. This is 14th March 2021, our 33rd BC Open discussion. And as discussed last week, today we're going to talk about a little bit about performance and how should we code with keeping performance in the mind, that our code execute a little bit better than it currently runs, and what's new in Business Central around it. So before we start, let's go through the normals. The first one is, where do you register? You register on this page. If you are in the meeting today and you don't want to register every week, just drop your name and email in the chat, and I'll add you in the default attendee list so that you don't have to register again, ever. If you have questions, then they get added into this Microsoft form. If anybody want to present, they can add their details here, and I'll reach out to them, and then we kind of schedule how it goes. Okay, so before we start, let's talk about what's coming up in the next week. So the two major news from the last week and coming week is that the public preview of Business Central 18, or aka 2021 release wave 1, is now available. And I think I have an article already written about it, how you can set up Docker based on that public preview on your local machine or on your cloud sandboxes. So start setting that up, see what's new in the product, and then we'll see next month when it gets released. And the good thing is that Business Central 18 will also be available with India localization. And then on March 16th to 18th, Dynamics Con is there, which is free for anybody. So if you haven't registered, go there, get your registration done. Quite a good amount of sessions, technical, functionals around Business Central. So this year my topic was not selected, but yeah, there are other great presenters who are speaking. So go ahead and register if you haven't, and we'll see you there. So now let's talk about a demo scenario that I have created for today. And in the middle, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me and we'll go from there. So the scenario that I've created is that I've created 3 extensions on item ledger entries table, and each extension have an integer and a text field. Then we'll see how having these extensions impact the find set, and when we actually code around that particular table where we have a table extension. And then we'll talk about what we can do as per tenant extension or ISV developer to increase the performance of that custom code. And at the end, then we'll see that how these multiple table extension can impact the performance of the base code, because there are only 2 areas where the performance will be impacted. One is on our custom code and one is on the base Microsoft code. So before we begin, let's have a look on the code that we have. This repo is available on GitHub, so you can pull it anytime. There's a workspace where there are 3 extensions, as I said, and each extension have, in the source, there is an extension, table extension, with one field of type text and one field of type integer. So that available in extension 1. That's also available in extension 2. Similar kind of field, extension 2 int, extension 2 text, and the same is available on extension 3. So to save some time, what I did is I built one other extension for loading the data, and this extension have 2 code units. One is for item ledger entry subscriber, which on insert of while a record is inserted on item ledger entry, it randomly keys in a value on type integer, and I should also have done it for text, but okay, we can do that. So it's just a random function which inserts a random value between 1 to 100 and 2 to 200 and 3 to 300 in these fields so that we have some dummy data loaded. And then because I wanted some data to create a little bit load on the system, I created this install code unit. Now the idea behind this install code unit is that when we run this code unit, it will create item journal lines, which then I can post with some random data on a on a default batch of item journal. And if you are testing it after this session, you can increase this count to whatever number you want so that you have some load. So right now I'll republish this extension so that we'll see 5 records in my item journal line. I already have posted, I guess, 20,000 records over there. Uh, so we'll have good amount of data in that extension. So let's see once it gets published. And close this here, and here is the business central environment. So the idea behind this extension was just to create those item journal lines that then can be used in our process. Okay, so if I go to item journal line, I'll have some random data. I should have some random data. So I have 5 lines because I set it to 5. So if you're testing it later, you can increase it to whatever number you want. We'll just go ahead and randomly pick your items and randomly pick some quantities and put it there. The next step would be post these item journal lines. So once you post, let's say 20,000, 30,000 line based on how much load you want, you'll have that many entries into the system. So now we have the data that we need to kind of simulate our performance environment. So now let's create a random code to kind of go through this process so that we can see kind of the load on the system. So what I'll do is I'll create a code unit here and name it as, let's say, performance testing.codeunit.al. Now the idea behind this code unit is to kind of run loop through a particular on item ledger entry records, and as we have that integer field, so you utilize that integer field to just to calculate sum of all that integer field. That will be a kind of a local function. So let's create a local P procedure, and that procedure is, let's say we want to click say total extension int fields. It will return the total value of an integer. Here I'll do a item ledger entry. Record item ledger entry. Okay. Let's quickly write this piece. So we'll do something like this. Find set, and then we'll do a repeat until where my item ledger entry dot next is equals to 0. Okay. And the expectation is that total val will kind of sum up whatever is in item ledger entry dot extension 1 integer. I'm just trying to sum up all the values that are there in this field and then returning this value to the calling function. So let's do it here so that I can call this code unit. And I also want to see how much time it took. So I'll create a start time. And I can do my start time as time, and then I can put a message to show the execution time is equals to this, and then total amount that is written by this as %2. My first one is time minus start time, and second one is whatever is returned from this function. Okay. This makes sense. This is how we'll write a typical repeat until situation or AL. Now let's create a page so that we can call this code unit from there. So I'll create a new file. We'll name it same. Okay, it's performance testing.page.al. Okay, and this is 50,000. The name is sorry. Now this is of type list all, and I don't need a source table. I also don't need a layout. I just need an action. Okay. So let's name this action test loop. Application area is all. My caption is calculate totals. And same is my tooltip. Okay. Then let's add an image of current totals. Okay. And I will set it to promoted, and then promoted is big so that I can see it. Okay. Now I just need to run an object, so I don't need this. I'll do a run object, and I'll run my code unit on testing. So now let's publish this, and then we'll see how we can check what actually happens when we see this. So this is again open on a separate tab. Let me open the earlier one if I can. Okay. So let's search for that page, performance testing. And the idea is that when I click on this, it'll return me, oh, it's bad, 0 second. How come 0 second? Let's go back to code. What we have written is our time minus start time, which is correct. And oh, because it's actually calculating on the same line, so I'll have to kind of create a variable here. Okay. Amount. Okay. Now it'll show me the right time. Okay. Let me stop the debugger here. Okay. So now if I go to that performance testing page, if I do a calculate totals, it tells me that it took 656 milliseconds, if I'm not wrong, to calculate this total from item ledger entries. Till here, all okay? Any confusions? Anybody? It all looks good. Okay. So if it is okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going back to our old friend called SQL Server Profiler. If you don't have it, if you haven't used it, you will find it on your local installation. And I'm going to connect it to my Docker with my credentials. Now my SQL profiler is supposed to show me what actually happens in SQL when I write that repeat until loop. And what kind of query, SQL query is generated, because I guess that was the discussion that we were having last week, that what kind of query is being generated when you do something like this. So what I've done is I've already created a template of events that I want, and it's just simple. I need to select these two, which can trace all this, and then you need to just apply a filter of your database name here. Oh, it's gone. Okay, I can apply a database filter if it is not there. Column filters. Okay, login, object ID, database name. I have already applied the filter of database like Cronus. So any event while I'm executing this code, what we have written, it'll get traced here, and we'll be able to see the SQL query against our where is that? Against our this loop of code, which is just trying to sum up a field that is coming from one of the extension that is available in the database. So let's test this. So what I'll do is I'll run this here, and I'll click on this action. The code is completed here. I'll go back to trace, and I'll pause it or stop it. Now this is what we were discussing last week, if you were there, is to identify what kind of select statement is generated when you have a table extension in your particular extension. So let it stop and we'll see that. Okay, so let me zoom this in. This is the select statement. 32 is the table number for item ledger entry in the database. So sorry, it might not be visible here in a good way. So let me put it on Notepad so that I can zoom it in. So this is the query. If you see it, it is actually doing a select star, which means select all fields in that table plus all fields from those table extensions. And then if you see, or maybe I have this image on the slide deck. Let me open the slide deck again. So when you do a find set, the way we were doing in our code, it actually does a select star of the base Microsoft table, sorry, plus all the fields from the table extension. If you have one table extension, then only one field. But if you see, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 field from my 3 extension that I've added. And then it does this join behind the scene between the table and the table extension to fetch that data. I guess this is what we all kind of expected when we were discussing it last week. That will do a select star. So if you have 20 table extension to item ledger entry, it will actually do those 20 table extension joins and will fetch all the fields from those table extension when you do something like a find set or a find first in your code, as we have done here, this piece of code. So whenever you'll do a find first, find set, find, any find will eventually come back and do a select like this. Any questions, confusion at this point before we move ahead?
So we have 3 extensions. So the query has 3 joins, right?
Yes. So if you see here on this repo, the extension 1 have these two fields, ext1 int and ext1 text, which are also available here as ext1 int and ext1 text, right? And then for extension 2, in the same way, there is ext2 int and ext2 text. They are available at the beginning. And then because the table and table extension are kind of linked based on the primary key of the table, then it does that join based on the entry number in case of item ledger entry. That's kind of the primary key of that table, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
So now before we see kind of, as in this is kind of the standard way as everybody would have expected that this will happen. But at the same time, Microsoft is also working and they understand that this is a problem. So if I'm not wrong, with business until 17, that is the correct version when it was released, there was something called as partial record which was announced. Now this is very important when you build your per tenant extension based on the performance, how you want your code to execute. So it does not do a select star if you do a partial record. If you follow these practices of partial record pulling, it only does a subset of fields that need to be fetched when you do a find in your code. That is by default implemented from platform in the reports and OData pages. So you don't have to worry about the report, the fields that you're adding, or in the OData page. The platform automatically does that because it knows which fields are available in this page or report, and it only fetches those fields instead of doing a select star. But this situation becomes complex when you're talking about table extension, because throughout your application, you might write hundreds of find sets because you have a complex code. So if you don't write your code considering partial record, then at the runtime, system will load all the normal fields which are available in the table and table extension. And normal fields means that exclude your flow fields and flow filters. So all the normal fields will be loaded while accessing that data from the SQL. But if you use partial record concept, then it will only pick the selected field that you want to execute your custom code. And this rule applies for the custom fields as well as for the base Microsoft field. So let's understand what's that partial record API is. So with AL from Business Central 17, there are certain keywords and methods that you can use to fetch the partial records that you want instead of fetching the whole record set, which includes your table extension and tables. And they are kind of divided into two groups. One is the subsequent load method and one is the current load method. And we'll quickly see what that means, and then we'll use one of them. So in the subsequent one, there are two types of method. One is set load fields and another is add load field. These load fields are applicable on record types and record ref types. So you can apply now both if you want. The only difference between set load field and add load field is that if you write multiple times set load field, it will clear whatever the fields that you have set earlier. And we'll see it maybe in an example in a while. In the add load field situation, it will not remove the earlier field that you have set in your query, and it will add more fields into it. So this will not override what you have previously selected for loading from a certain table. And it can be any type of field. It not need to be mandatory to have an integer or a decimal data type. You can fetch a text field in the load fields. And we'll see how it helps in your SQL query behind the scene when you use these methods. The other one are the current load method are just to help you while you're coding your extension, that the field that you are trying to fetch, are they loaded or not. So it just checks that what you requested earlier, are they in there or not if you need, and then it loads those specific field at just in time if required. So we'll see that example. So let's quickly change our extension to see the impact of that. Where is that? Okay, here it is. So what we'll do now is we'll collapse all these extension, and on this one where our code is, because I know in this loop that I'm writing, I only need the extension one int field to do all my calculation, right? I beforehand know this, that I'll only need this. So what I can do before my loop start is I can do a set load field, and I can name all the fields that I want. I'm just doing my extension one int. So let's publish this change, and then we'll see in our SQL profiler how it behaves when we run this. Okay, so let's go to that page. So we did copy the time that it took last time, which was this 656 millisecond, and the total sum was this of that integer value. So if I do it now, this is the time that it took by just adding that set load field. The tree extension in picture, this is the time reduction by just adding that set load field in, before going into my repeat until. Let me open that code again here. So what system is trying to do now, because it know that going forward in this area you only need extension one int, so instead of doing select star, it does select selective field plus extension one int from SQL, so that that SQL trip to fetch the data and provide it back to the, back to the code segment, fetches a smaller result set, and because of that your code executes faster. So let's see what I mean by it doesn't do a select star. So what we'll do is we'll open our page where we are here. Okay, and then I'll also open my profiler. Let's start this again, and I'll click on that action again. Okay, go back and pause this again. So this time the select statement will be different than the previous one where we didn't had this load field into our code. And this will tell you that how much difference it will create while you're writing your custom code into that. Okay, so come on. Okay, is it the last one, or oh no, I need to go from here. Here it is. So this is the new SQL query that is created when you use the set load statement. It did fetch some base Microsoft field, which is the primary key that was required, a timestamp. And I'm still thinking how Microsoft decided that they need these fields, but they were loaded. And in addition to these fields, which are from Microsoft, which ends here, it only loaded my one custom field which I wanted from the extension. And because it only needed that one custom field from the extension, you will see here, I'll go back to my slide if I can. It actually created only one join instead of creating those three join. Because I had three extension, it only pulled one field from the table extensions that I have and only created one join because it needed it to fetch this field. So think about it, if I just change it to have on a standard item ledger entry field, as in you don't need to use set load field only for the extension tables. So let's see here, what I'm trying to say is, if instead of using this extension one, let's suppose you are not trying to sum up this custom field, you are trying to sum up, let's see, a field here, quantity. Its quantity is a flow field here or not? Item ledger entry quantity should not be. Let's have a look. Okay. So suppose in your custom code you wanted to sum up the quantity. So you can always use set load field also here for the quantity. Now remember, I have 3 extension in place, but in this case, the SQL query that will be generated will include none of those extension table, because those are not required by me at this point. I haven't chosen those field, like set load field here, right?
Saurabh, sorry to interrupt you, but I
Go
think
ahead.
your screen is not refreshing. We can still see notepad file only.
Oh, let me stop it and do it again, maybe. Thank you. Okay, so let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, so I'll go back again. What I was trying to say is that if even in your custom extension that you're writing, you don't want to do a sum up of a custom field that is part of your extension, you actually want to, let's say, sum up the base Microsoft quantity field. So I just changed the set load field to fetch the quantity field and then wanted to sum up the quantity only. So let's go back to our SQL trace and I'll stop it so that it gets cleared from here. And then we'll rerun this scenario. Okay. So here we are. Let me load that page till then. Okay. Okay, so let me start it here now. This time it's that quantity field and I'll calculate the sum. It's done in some time and let's stop this. Okay. Now let's see our select 32 statement. Now see this one. This is because I was not using the field from the extension. This one didn't need at that join. So it did this, the primary key, the quantity field which I wanted, the source type, and as I said, I'm still investigating how Microsoft decide that which other field need to be fetched in. But it didn't have to do a join because the field that I specified in my load statement was a base Microsoft field. So it only fetches that field which I need in my calculation. So when you're coding, even if you're coding against base Microsoft, where you're not relying on your fields while you're writing your custom code, you can still use the set load field or add load field methods to kind of increase the performance of that code. So that's what is available with the partial record. Now let's talk about before we end this, is about the impact on performance of table extension. Now, as we have seen on our initial example, that anytime we do a find set or a find, it always fetches all the tables and table extension. Now we need to remember this, that we can use this set load field and other things in our custom code, but Microsoft haven't started doing it on the base app yet, as in I haven't seen much instances of doing it. So wherever the Microsoft base code is called and you have, let's say, 10 table extension on one particular table, and just to take an example, on a journal line table you have, let's say, 10 table extension. Now that journal line table is kind of created and posted during your sales posting, during your purchase posting, and all other transaction. So in those situations, Microsoft is not using load fields at this point. And whenever the base Microsoft code will be called, something like this will happen. And that many joins will be created. Number of joins will be equivalent to number of table extension that you have against that particular base Microsoft table.
But I have something in mind because I think they can't add this function in the standard. Why
They
I'm saying
can,
it?
other than these statements as it is pointed here, that inserts, deletes, renames, and transfer field and copying on the temporary record, you cannot use, because you need the whole record set, right? I guess that was you were coming to, Vijay.
Yeah, I
That
think.
on this situation, you'll need to have the whole record set with table and all the subsidiary table that you have. But what I'm saying is, in the situations where Microsoft had their code where it calculates, different fields for reports or different fields for displaying in the page, in those situations, they can use
They can
the
use.
load field situation to reduce the impact.
Correct, but everywhere they can't use
No, everywhere they cannot.
because they have extensions na, so we can subscribe every object extension na. Or through those extensions, even we can have extended table extensions, so we can use by subscribing those events we can use our custom fields. So I think that's why they can't use
Yeah,
it.
and then there's one more thing, as in it doesn't exclude something. So let me, as we have some time, let me show you this. Like, this is quantity, right?
Hmm.
Initially, I decided that I might only need quantity field in my calculation, and I deployed this extension. And
Hmm.
tomorrow, Vijay came in into the same project and thought, okay, this all looks good, but they don't want a sum of quantity. They actually want a sum of a custom field, right? And he forgot to update this. So in this situation, there will be a second call which will include this field. So it will not completely exclude your formula. It will load this value on that time when this line is executed. So let's see the impact of this one, where the field that I'm using in my calculation is not part of my set load field.
Hmm.
So system does not have that info firsthand that I need to fetch the extension one integer value, because that is used in the code. But when the code reaches to this point, then it understands that, okay, the calculation is based on this, and then there will be, I'm hoping, a second call to fetch that value. So let's load that, and let me load the SQL profiler here. Let me start this here. And is it started? Not yet. Okay. Okay, I'm waiting for this to start, and then we can see what happens. Okay, it started. Let's do the calculate totals. This one is done. Let's stop this and see this. Okay. So in this case, there was this table 32 query, right? Which went on everything, I guess. Now this is interesting. I guess this went back to the situation where we were earlier, right?
Seems like.
Yeah, it seems like it went back to the whole situation if that is not part of that, which is odd. I thought it'll only do a second trip to fetch that field, because in this situation, what it did, it fetched the extension one int, and then let's see what is this. So it fetches that timestamp, quantity, source type, dimension, set ID, and did one join. And then there was this one, which did a timestamp source type. So I don't understand why this one is there. 218 PQ. Let me stop it again and let's try again. It should not be the legacy one. Because I was thinking that it will do a select with those fields which are specified in that load field section here. And then it'll do another call to just to fetch the field that I'm using in my code. That was my expectation. Okay, so is it not getting clear? It should get clear. Okay. Let me close this and do a new trace so that it's fresh. Okay. And okay. 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 And let's stop this. Okay. Okay, so that was, I guess that was the wrong word which was trying to read earlier. It did first this. A little bit odd. Let's see this. So the first time when it went to SQL, it gave me extension one int, and then the base fields, and then the system created ones which are needed. And then it did one join because that field was coming from one of the extension. Second trip that it took, it did the similar thing, and I guess that's just based on the 50 record counts that it's returning to fetch the same value. So even if you don't set the right field in your set load field, it will not go back and fetch the whole record set as it did in the first situation where we had no load field returns, right? So even with having a different field than what is in the load field, it only fetched the fields which were required in the calculation of this code, instead of fetching all the fields from item ledger entry and all the table extensions. Does that make sense?
So it essentially did a new set load fields on extension one
Yes.
int. It was smart enough to
Yes.
do that.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
And as we saw the time difference, it's a pretty good amount of time difference just with that load field statement.
Can you show those two new queries again?
Okay.
Where's the extension one int? I just wanted to see the difference. Sorry.
So the extension one int
in the query.
In the SQL query?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go back.
I couldn't see the difference. Sorry.
Okay. On the last one which we just ran?
Yeah. Yeah, where you pasted in the two new ones.
Yeah, so if you see here, the first one is this 32E9,
it's right.
which is extension.
That's impressive. Well, even the first one had ext1 int though, right?
Yeah, so this one seems a little bit different because it's doing where entry number is greater than 1 order byte. No, so that's the same query. And
is the compiler seeing that there's a mismatch on the field and it's smart enough to override from the very beginning?
Yes, that's what is written on what I was able to read on MSDN about it.
Wow.
That it can fetch the fields that are required at the runtime.
So even if you make a mistake and make a change to the code and forget to update your set load fields, it appears to handle it quite well.
Yeah, but at least you need to have this statement in your code.
Right.
Otherwise,
right.
it'll do
Yep.
that select star thing.
Got it. Very
Now
cool.
now the only catch is number of table extension and impact of it on the inserts and modifier, because anytime that happens, the query to SQL is to fetch everything, which includes the main table and all subsidiary table, which are part of your table extension. So those are the situation where we need to, or where there will be a little bit impact on the performance, because there is no way we can change that behavior of the base Microsoft code, right? But in your custom code, just by adding that set load field, you can see that this was the new query instead of having this query. So just go through this. There's a good amount of documentation about partial records in Business Central, which just talks about these 4 methods which we talked about. And then give it a try. This extension will be, this code base will be available on the GitHub, and you can give it a try. Okay, any questions for today? Okay, so then Steve, we'll see you in Dynamics Con this week.
Yes, I have a session on Wednesday, I believe the 17th, on Business Central and Office integrations.
Great. So see you there.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so if there are no questions, I guess we can save some time back. And if there are any questions, then I'll be happy to answer if I can.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess no. Okay, thank you. See you next Saturday. I'll set up that invite, as in whosoever are default attendees will get it on Friday. Others can either add their email and name in the chat or register for next week.